Shalom, y'all. Welcome back. What happens when a short prophetic book keeps speaking long after its first setting? Obadiah was spoken against ancient Edom, but through the centuries, Jewish and Christian readers have continued to hear its warnings about pride and empire and betrayal and the reign of God. That doesn't mean every interpretation is saying the same thing. It means that this little book has a long and complicated life in the history of interpretation. Shalom, y'all. It's Beth Shalom. Welcome back to my final lesson in the three-part study that I made here of the little book of Obadiah. In the first lesson, we looked at the major themes in the background: Edom, Jacob, pride, betrayal, the day of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, and the kingdom belonging to him. In the second lesson, we traced the places of Obadiah and their significance, from the heights of Edom to the wound of Jerusalem, and finally to the hope in Mount Zion and the restoration map at the end. And now we're going to look at the prophetic reception of Obadiah in Rabbinic and Christian interpretation. And I want to be clear about the goal here of this lesson. I'm not arguing for one prophetic interpretation over another. I'm not looking at how Obadiah has been read and agreeing with anybody or disagreeing with anybody. I'm just looking at how Obadiah has been read in Jewish and Christian tradition. Some readings are historical, some are symbolic, some are moral, some are messianic, some are eschatological. Big word. Our goal is only to understand the interpretive landscape, not to force the book any one place, okay? So let's begin with that plain historical layer that we have. Obadiah is a prophetic word from God concerning the land of Edom. And Edom was associated with Esau, who was the brother of Jacob. They were the sons of Isaac. The central accusation within this book and the words from God is violence against your brother Jacob. Edom stood back during the calamity that befell Judah and rejoiced over it. They entered the gates of the city of Jerusalem. They plundered the city. They cut off the fugitives that were running away, and then they handed over the survivors. And so before Obadiah becomes a symbol of anything else, it is a prophetic word against a real people in relationship to a real violent act and a betrayal. But because Edom is connected to Esau, the book naturally opens up a wider interpretative door in Jewish tradition. So this is going to be brief. I'm not going into very specific details. I'm not studied enough in that, but I'm just bringing these things to you in case you want to look them up and see. Rabbinic interpretation often reads Edom through the Jacob and the Esau story, which is fitting. It should. This makes Obadiah a book about more than conflict between two nations. It becomes a book about brotherly betrayal. Esau and Jacob are now not only old figures from Genesis, characters in a book. Their descendants become symbols of two lines and two postures, two ways of relating to the covenant history. In some rabbinic traditions, Obadiah himself is identified with the Obadiah from the days of Ahab and Jezebel, the man who hid the prophets of God in caves and then provided for them. Some traditions say he was an Edomite convert. And that reading, there's kind of poetic justice here. I think a righteous man connected with Edom becomes the prophet who speaks judgment against them. And the rabbis also noticed that contrast. Obadiah lived among wicked people and did not imitate them. Esau came from righteous parents and did not imitate them. That becomes a moral reading now about the environment you're in, the choices you make, and how faithful you are. That rabbinic move is important because it shows how the rabbis often read scripture with careful attention to character, your lineage, and moral contrasts in certain stories. Obadiah is not only delivering information, he becomes part of the message. His identity, interpreted in that tradition, becomes a commentary on Edom itself. Another major rabbinic interpretation of Edom is that they are Rome. This becomes especially important after Rome destroys Jerusalem and the temple in the year 70. And later, the Roman oppression of the Jewish people. In late antiquity and medieval Jewish interpretation, Edom often becomes a symbolic name for Rome. Sometimes Edom or Seir is also used more broadly for oppressive power associated with Rome, and in later Jewish writings, even with the Christian empires. This doesn't mean that Obadiah originally named Rome in its plain historical sense. It did not name Rome at all. Rome is not in there, as far as I know. The historical Edom of Obadiah is ancient Edom, the people who descended from Esau. But later Jewish readers saw in Edom a pattern that could be applied to Rome. Edom and Rome both had in common arrogance, violence, hostility towards Israel, and the destruction or oppression of Jerusalem. And so in that reading, Edom becomes more than a vanished ancient neighbor. They are a prophetic symbol now for empire that exalts itself against God and the people of God. And I want to be careful here. Rabbinic Edom is often symbolic and historical at the same time, and that's very rabbinical. It's rooted in the memory of Esau and the ancient land of Edom, but it's extended to Rome because Rome became the embodiment of oppression in the historical memory of the Jewish nation. I don't think it's simple ethnic labeling to apply carelessly to a modern people. Ancient Edom is a distinct people, but eventually they were absorbed into the surrounding population. So when we discuss later symbolic Edom, we're discussing interpretation. And we're not drawing a clear bloodline map into modern worlds. You can't do that with Edom, again, because they were assimilated into the rest of the nations. Rabbinic interpretation also gives quite a strong attention to the ending of the book. Mount Zion, Mount Esau, and the line, the kingdom shall be Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. They're read in relation to the final redemption. The downfall of Edom can become a picture of the collapse of oppressive power. Zion is delivered and is a picture of the restoration of Israel. And the final line of the book points beyond ordinary politics and ordinary nation problems. It points towards the reign of God. Now let's turn to Christian interpretation. Christian with a capital C. Christian readings of Obadiah often begin with the historical Edom as well. Many Christian interpreters understand Obadiah first as a prophetic judgment against ancient Edom for its pride, and this is the baseline reading that shouldn't be skipped. If we skip that historical setting, we remove the book from the soil in which it was given, literally. From there, Christian interpretation often develops moral or spiritual readings. Edom becomes the pattern of pride and resentment and violence and envy and hostility towards the people of God. Edom is not treated only here now as an ancient nation. It become a warning for the heart, the human heart. The pride of Edom becomes the pride that says, who can bring me down? The violence of Edom becomes a cruelty that takes advantage of another person. Indifference of Edom becomes spiritual danger of standing aside when a brother is in distress. Some Christian interpreters, I don't know if you've heard this phrase before, but I'm going to throw it out, have read Edom typologically. In typological reading, a person or a place or event in Scripture is seen as a pattern that points beyond itself. So Edom may be read as a type of worldly opposition to God, the flesh against the spirit, the proud kingdom opposed to Zion, or the arrogant power that resists the purposes of God. These readings can vary, but I think they need to be handled quite carefully. Typology can be fruitful when it grows out of the text. It can be absolute nonsense when people make it say whatever they wanted to say before they opened up the Bible. That's shocking, I know. Probably have never heard anything such as that. Never heard anything. People just making stuff up. Right. There are also Christian prophetic or eschatological readings of Obadiah. And many Christian interpreters connect the day of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh here with the final judgment. The judgment of Edom becomes a part of the larger biblical pattern in which God confronts all the nations, judges all wickedness, restores his people, and establishes his kingdom. That final line, the kingdom shall be Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, is often read in light of Messiah and the final triumph of God's rule. Other Christian traditions may connect Edom with end-time opposition to Israel or with specific prophetic scenarios, and we hear a lot about that today. Again, in this lesson, I'm not arguing for or against any of those views. We're identifying that such things exist. Yes? What we should insist on is that any prophetic reading must remain anchored to the text itself. Pride, betrayal, violence, the day of the Lord, deliverance of Zion, and the kingdom belonging to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Across Rabbinic and Christian interpretation, then, we can see several major layers. The first is historical, ancient Edom, ancient Judah. Obadiah speaks into a real crisis that really happened. The second layer is moral. Edom becomes a warning about being prideful, betraying your brother, rejoicing over somebody else's misery. The third layer is imperial. Rabbinic tradition especially. Edom becomes Rome, the arrogant empire remembered for being oppressive and destructive. The fourth layer, again, is messianic or eschatological, that big long word. Obadiah's ending points towards the restoration, judgment, Zion, and the final reign of God. And these layers aren't all the same, and they should not be blended together carelessly. But understanding them helps us see why Obadiah has mattered so deeply across the centuries. It's not only a story about an ancient border conflict. It speaks to recurring realities in history: brotherly betrayal, violent power, empires, suffering, the scattering of exiles, and the hope that God's kingdom will prevail. For us followers of Yeshua, there's also, I think, a serious caution. We must not use Obadiah to create hatred against modern ethnic groups. That's not a faithful interpretation. The Edomites, as a distinct people, were absorbed into other populations. And later symbolic uses of Edom in Jewish and Christian interpretation must be handled as interpretive traditions, not as permission to identify and condemn people as though we were the prophets. History has endured enough of that nonsense. The better application is to recognize the Edom pattern. Pride that trusts in their height, hostility towards the brother, joy over another's suffering, and indifference. Violence when somebody's vulnerable, confidence that judgment won't ever come to you. That pattern can appear in nations, empires, communities, churches, families, and even in an individual's heart. Rabbinic readers saw Edom and Rome because Rome became the empire that wounded Jerusalem. Christian readers have seen Edom as a symbol of a proud opposition to God. Both streams remind us that the language used in the book of Obadiah continues to speak because the pattern continues to appear. But Obadiah does not end by giving us some endless speculations. It ends with the kingdom, and that's crucial. The final word of the book of Obadiah is not Edom, and it's not Rome. The final word is not another empire. The final word is not even the interpreter's favorite prophetic system or how to interpret what's going on here. The final word is the kingdom shall be the Lord's. That line should be humble every time you read it. It pulls us away from being obsessed about interpretations and back towards focusing on who we need to worship. The purpose of prophetic interpretation is not to make us clever people. It's to help make us more faithful people. It should teach us to fear Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and trust that history does not belong to the power of the arrogant. So here's a real life application for this final lesson. Ask the Lord to teach you to discern without speculating. When you read prophetic scripture, don't rush to identify the enemies before you've allowed the text to examine you. Ask where that Edom pattern appears in you. Ask, where have you trusted your own heights and protection? Where have you been indifferent and suffering? Where have you preferred judgment to mercy? And lift your eyes to the end of this book. The kingdom belongs to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. That is the hope of Obadiah. Beyond Edom, beyond Rome, beyond every empire and betrayal, every city that's been ransacked, every scattered exile, and every height that people think cannot fall. Obadiah has been read through history as judgment and warning and symbol and hope. But every faithful reading must end where the book ends, with the reign of God. May we read this little book with all humility. May we honor the historical setting that it has given us. May we learn from the wisdom of those who have interpreted it before us. May we resist pride and refuse brotherly betrayal and place our hope not in speculations, but in Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, whose kingdom will stand. Shalom, y'all, and thanks for listening. We're going to go on to some more small books, so keep tuning in. Shalom, y'all. Bye.